Live now to my Sky News colleague, US Report host James Morrow. James, great to see you as always. We've seen a few developments that I want to talk about. One was a surge in donations to the RNC off the back of Nikki Haley pulling out of the race.
Yeah, this is really interesting news here. You know, for months now, there's been a bit of quiet concern in the ranks of Republicans that their fundraising efforts were just not matching the Democrats. And then when it came down to the ground game, to advertising, to everything else, they could wind up being outflanked by the Democrats, which, of course, you know, Kieran, being the party of the working man and woman, carves up all of that money from Hollywood and big business and Silicon Valley. You know, go figure. So the Trump campaign, now that Nikki Haley is out of the way, though, that seems to be really improving their fortunes. They raised something like $59 million US, which was 3 times more they had raised in the previous couple of months. So that's actually quite big for the Republicans because we know that this is such a money game, winning the White House.
We've seen a few developments in the last week on a couple of different fronts for Donald Trump legally. What do you see as the biggest concern right now?
Well, right now, the biggest concern, I think, would have to be that hush money trial, which is going on in New York. Now, this is a really bizarre case, by the way. This is that claiming that Donald Trump falsified business records to pay off an ex-mistress so that she'd, you know, stay stum about their affair during the 2016 campaign. Now, fine, you know, the really interesting thing about this is that this is taking place in a very partisan courtroom. Trump has been accusing the judge and his family of being basically in the tank for the Democrats. He's now been slapped with a gag order on all of this, which is pretty remarkable for this sort of thing. But a lot of people don't think he can get a fair trial in New York. And one interesting thing here, you know, the accusation is that he mislabeled records so that he could hide this payment to Stormy Daniels. In 2022, the Hillary campaign from 2016 finally settled a case they had with the Electoral Commission in the U.S. over their use of, you know, disguising payments to the people who came up with the Steele dossier, which was the whole thing about the funny business between Russia and Trump, which all turned out to be a hoax, and in which that whole Russia hoax was based on. They paid a $100,000 fine, and that was the end of it. This, however, you know, because it's much more political, and all of these judges seem to want to get Trump in that scalp, very different story.
Oh, this is like a story like no other, isn't it? Incredible. Yeah. And the last week we've seen some big news out of the US. The story that was front page here as well for a few days, the collapse of the bridge in Baltimore. James, it obviously has a major series of economic implications, but there are political implications too.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not even just the political implications. It's almost, I guess you could almost say, the philosophical implications of this. You know, there's this sort of general mood of malaise in the United States. It reminds me of sort of the late 70s under Jimmy Carter. And this idea that, you know, bridges are falling down and that it could take years and years to repair and rebuild this bridge and get that port open again, you know, that all plays into this idea that under the Democrats and under Joe Biden, the country is in decline. People point out that the Empire State Building was built, you know, in a little over a year, I think it was, and yet it could take years to repair and rebuild this span across a harbor. And they say, what has happened to America? You know, you go to other countries from America, the infrastructure looks much brighter and better, you know, almost anywhere you go, including Australia. And so, you know, it does play into Trump's hand, that idea that America is in decline. Now, whether Donald Trump can fix that, that's another question.
Indeed, it's a huge ask. And finally, Annalise Nielsen gave us a really good insight into that story of illegal arrivals being taken from Texas to other cities around the United States, including Denver, Colorado, and a bit of a nuanced report, a bit of a sense of the fact that this story on arrivals from Mexico, it's not just an issue for the border states.
No. This is actually a huge issue everywhere you go. You know, you're seeing it hugely in places like Denver, Chicago, New York, Boston. All of these cities, by the way, where their Democrat mayors had declared themselves sanctuary cities, where they say, oh, well, you know, we're going to welcome all these illegals and they're going to be, you know, so enriching to our communities. We're going to do what we can. And now, of course, it's become a disaster because they simply don't have any place to put them. It's stretching all of their social services. There's a lot of other stuff that goes along with it, including crime, I have to say. In a lot of these places, as people, as some of these migrants, not all obviously, but some, you know, commit pretty horrendous crimes. And it often turns out that they were released at the border having been known to be criminals, or that they've been released by judges after committing other crimes. So again, it plays into that, narrative of decline that I think Donald Trump is so keen to exploit as he runs for November.
Indeed, James. Great to chat. See you next week.
See you next week, Kieran.